IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I am Pranay and I have with me Anupam and Nitin, and we are going to discuss India's economy. So Anupam, first of all, how do we characterize the current economic slowdown which is being talked about a lot in newspapers, right? What is your assessment?
Yeah, it's part of the business cycle, so it is... let's not go into whether it's cyclical and structural.
That's the new
one of the
debate,
things
right?
that people are talking about. It is a slowdown. Yes, it's part of the business cycle as well. And there are things which are structural in nature as well. But let's not, cherry pick on those things. This has been showing up in more than a year's time or something, starting with the job losses. As it is, we are not doing great on creating new jobs, but there was now suddenly that we started losing jobs as well in 2018, for example. Investment rate has fallen, export is at a 41-month low rate. So all forms of inflation is at extremely low levels. For a growing economy like India, it's about 2 to 3%. So all macroeconomic indicators is pointing to the fact that India is experiencing a slowdown, and that it's probably set to continue for some time. This is, of course, coinciding with things that are happening at the global level. There might be a global slowdown as well, and there are various indicators about that. There's a trade war going on, so this is basically the pessimistic picture that I wanted to paint.
Yeah, but I just want to come in and say, I think this business of global slowdown, we just have to put it aside. An economy like ours has no business slowing down. The global slowdown, probably matters at the margins, but given a large domestic market, with the growing demographics, with the large domestic economy, I don't think we should be in any kind of a slowdown or say that, global factors have a lot to do with our slowdown.
Especially given the fact that we were never too reliant on the global economy in the first place. Our trade to GDP percentage is extremely low, less than 20% or so. So it's not something that we can really give as an excuse. The only place perhaps where it will come into play is that we were kind of heavily reliant on FDI and FII. So when there is a slowdown, the chance of that money coming into India will reduce by a bit, especially given that, if the interest rate in US is slightly higher than interest
but
rates
we don't
in India,
go there. But even there, if you say, just quickly on that, if the world doesn't provide a great opportunity for people to invest their money, India should, right? So in the sense that a lack of attractive investment opportunities around the world implies that if you have relatively better investment opportunities, the money should come here.
Exactly.
But let's not get into the foreign thing, interest rates and all your currency and all your fake macroeconomic nonsense.
And I think the big change has been, at least now, the government or the measures that they have taken over the last 1 month indicate at least there is an acknowledgement that there's a problem, right? A few months back, the response was, no, we are still growing well enough. It's just because of other factors. So I think that's why we should move our discussion more importantly to what is the way out of all this mess, right? So let's go back to the solution side of things, right? So now again, there is this investment cycle, there is consumption, there is savings. What is the causal loop for you, Anupam? How do you think we should revive the economy?
I think there's various kinds of interventions required at all levels, but I think interventions in getting the investment cycle back is of utmost importance because it's, again, a fall in investment from, let's say, 39% in 2012 to about 29% now, a 10 percentage point drop is quite huge, and you can't revive the economy in terms of consumption, wages, employment, all of that. For all of that to kind of revive, you need to get investment back on track. And as of now, business confidence is at, it's low. The people are not investing. You're seeing that. And again, that is linked to the availability of credit. So since we have a twin balance sheet problem, there's a massive NPAs in banks. They're not willing to lend. People are not willing to borrow, even if they're willing to lend. And corporates themselves have huge debt. So it's a wicked problem. It's twisted in its sense. But according to me, the focus should be on investment.
Actually, the twin balance sheet thing, I saw a very interesting report by CMI, Mahesh Vyas. They actually challenged the idea that there is a twin balance sheet crisis. They say that there is no problem with respect to flow of credit. There is enough money, and the indebtedness is not as bad as it's made out. And he goes against Arvind Subramanian's thing. He says you've cherry-picked data points to show that there is a NPA problem when there actually isn't. So one meta reason could be that the twin balance sheet crisis has so caught the public narrative and the economist narrative that we might be ignoring the possibility that there's no twin balance sheet crisis and the problems might be elsewhere.
Okay, I mean, I have to read that, but NPAs are about 20% of overall assets in lending, right? So
But they've been like this for the last 10 years?
Not 10 years. It's progressively worsened. It's progressively worsened over the last 10 years. From about 2005 onwards. So the peak boom period was also when a lot of lending was done and a lot of, let's say, indiscreet lending was done. And that started feeding into this kind of balance sheet problem for the banks since 2010 onwards. And it's steadily worsened over the years.
But I tend to be a little more suspicious of these macroeconomic narratives and macroeconomic solutions, right? And if you look at the whole conversation on how do we get the economy back on track, the conversation seems to be on macroeconomic things. What do we do with the price of the rupee? What do we do with interest rates? How do we get credit transmission from government to end users and all of those kind of things. But if you look at it from electrical engineer's point of view, I'm not an economist.
Yeah, get an electrical engineer to fix the economy.
Look, hard work in electrical engineering is more important than Harvard economics. Okay,
sure.
But here's what I would say. Okay, no. But really, with some basic electrical engineering sensibility, and say, look, the equation says Y, which is GDP, equals to government plus government expenditure plus consumer expenditure plus investment plus net exports, right? Yeah. So if you want to increase Y, if you want to increase GDP, you have to increase all four of these, right? And like how Narayan, our colleague, likes to say, the answer often in India is all of the above. So you can't say, should we increase government, should we increase investment, we increase all of these, right? Then the question is, how do we increase each of these, right? Let's come to government expenditure last, because increasing government expenditure
that's not a problem.
It's not a problem at all in the first instance, but it has other problems now.
Yeah, but just there, I just want to kind of intervene here and say that if you try to increase one and if you increase that too much, it might come at the expense of the others.
Yeah,
so
it
that's
always
exactly
comes
where
at the expense of the others, right? So, but let's prima facie look at it like simple, right? Now, okay, let's look at consumer expenditure first. What do you need to get consumers to spend more, right? The economy, as we know, people are not buying biscuits, people are not buying shoes, people are not buying clothes and underwear and all of those things. Basically, and cars. So everything from biscuits to cars, people are not buying. Yeah. Okay, and this is a fact. Now, why are not people buying? Because I think they feel they are anxious about the future, right? In the sense that they don't know whether they'll have enough money, whether they have enough jobs, or maybe it could even be the anxiety about the current. They might have lower incomes,
lower
job
dispensable
losses.
income round.
Yeah. So overall, their spending power has come down.
Yes.
Okay. And second, even if they have some spending power, they might be cautious about the future because they might think that, okay, it's better not to spend money, keep it in savings or gold or something, so that you tide it over. So you've got to fix this, right? You've got to generate incomes and you've got to get them to spend.
Yeah.
Right? Now, generating incomes is hard, but I think in the short term especially is hard. But I suppose in terms of not taking money from people,
exactly,
right, which means lowering tax,
yeah,
or cash rebates, tax rebates, and other things to individuals, and not, it might be politically incorrect to say this, but you would want to give cashbacks to the segment of the population that is most likely to spend it. Because if you want the economy to move, you want people to spend. So you don't want to give money to a guy like Anupam who puts it in his pocket and keeps it, right? You might want to give it to a guy like Nitin who spends the money.
Yeah.
Right? So the names here are not purely coincidental. but you want people who want to give money to people who can spend it, right? Number one. That's the short. But I think a larger one looks like you'll have to signal to the consumer that better times will come. Right?
Yes.
In the sense that your incomes will rise, your jobs will be created, right? And you will have more money to spend. So it's okay to spend now. In order to that, you'll have to create confidence in the consumer, right? And that's more of a psychological thing rather than anything else that you do.
Yeah. So, as you correctly put it, all forms of, this has two aspects to it. One is the reality in terms of how much money they have to spend, which you can increase through, various, tax backs and, tax cuts and so on. The other is how do you increase that consumer confidence? Now, in a lot of times, there is this life cycle hypothesis and so on. So any form of windfall gain that you might give to a consumer now might not really result in increased expenditure right away if there's no confidence.
Yeah, they might just put it in the pocket and save it. Okay, this is a windfall, let's keep it.
And no, precisely because they know that if I'm getting a windfall now, if the government will have to kind of make up for it later, and thus they will take away more later. So
right.
I'm just going to keep it at steady.
Right. So the signaling and getting the confidence back is probably the most critical thing, right?
On this point, so you were saying that money should go to the section which is most likely to spend it or invest it in other ways. So the corporate tax decrease, right? Isn't that a good
Yes,
one?
I think so. But it targets part of the problem, right? Which is the corporate sector. I suppose it's been done because it's much easier to do it for corporates than for individuals, let's say, right? Because individuals has an issue of targeting equity and all of that. Corporates are a very clear, very well identifiable target segment in which to do this. I think it's a good step. I think a lot of commentary around that you're giving SOPs to corporates and all that is either partisan, ideological or misguided. Giving a tax break to the corporates is probably a substantive signal that the government will be putting more money in the hands of the economy and instead of its own coffers. So I think that's a first step, but it's the first step. I strongly believe that you have to address the mindset of the consumer. And you have to address the mindset of the consumer who's likely to spend more. Who's going to buy cars, right? Who's going to buy underwear? Who's going to buy shoes? Who's going to buy computers? Who's going to buy phones? Things like this where a lot of the buying portion of the economy is on fire, right? And how do you do that?
And that is where, right, the poorest of the poor might not, that's not a good targeting option. The richest is not a good targeting option. It is that bulk, not even bulk, a sliver in the middle who
and
actually
that sliver in the middle can have multiplier effects because once people are seen to be spending, others could also start spending, and that's how it works. The idea is not to give 100 rupees to Anupam expecting that 100 rupees itself to make a difference, right? But the fact that once I see Anupam spending his money, and there's a feel-good factor which kicks in. And a lot of it's a mind game. The microeconomics is the study of human behavior, which is psychological in nature.
Yeah. So basically, both of you are ideally saying that maybe the income tax, the personal income tax levels might also go down.
In fact,
right?
I would say draw a massive reform to the income tax code, right? The direct tax code, making it extremely simple. Lowering it massively for the large part of the salary earning population is an important structural reform that we need to do.
This is anyway a good idea, and this is probably a very good time to do it.
So let's say you have to prioritize this, okay? The other side, like which Saurabh mentioned in one of the conversations which was going on our student group, alumni group, was about what about the indirect side, right? So GST, for example.
Absolutely.
Isn't that of... How does that fit into your equation?
Same story. Because if you reduce GST, if you reduce GST by 10%, right, from 28 to 18, it's a 10% discount to a buyer, right? So at the margin, a lot more people will buy that commodity
on a whole range of products. You want people to spend on and buy goods and services because that will have the highest amount of the multiplier effect, right? Because it increases production, which includes employment and wages and so on. So in that sense, I think indirect tax might even have a bigger effect because, again, direct taxes...
Large numbers of people pay.
Only a small percentage of India's population pay taxes. We know that, right? Whereas indirect
taxes.
Direct taxes, that's what I mean. Yeah. Indirect taxes applies to everyone. So in that sense, reducing indirect tax might have a much bigger impact.
It's anyway a good thing to do. You have a super complicated GST.
Yeah.
It's time to fix that GST. For goodness sake, fix it now. Right?
Having a luxury bracket for goods, and again, cars are luxury, ACs are luxury, and so on. That should go. Deodorants are luxury.
Sanitary napkins are luxury, but some other things are not.
All of that, right? Have a
And the good thing is, see, with GST, things are not ossified as on the personal income tax side, right? Like there is no history of 70 years. So it's actually easier to do that if there is will, and there's now with
intent.
the GST.
I think it's an intent issue. I think they've got to the governments, both the union and the state governments, have to grok this fact that this is a jam. And fixing the jam requires them to ease up on these taxes.
The only problem here, and the reason why they're not doing it already, is that their finances are in a mess and they can't afford. I mean, they think they can't afford to, have a higher fiscal deficit now. Which again, I mean, I seem like an old uncle now, but that is why you should keep your books cleaner at normal times so that you get to spend now. But even now, I say, I mean, in times like this, okay, as it is, you're breaking the FRBMA targets. Without any this thing. If it's 3.5% of GDP now, fiscal deficit, it's okay.
It's worth doing it.
Now, now it's justified.
Let's just jump to investment, right? The second part of it is investment. Now, how do you get investors to invest? Right? Of course, once consumer demand picks up, there will be investment in its own right? Because once people are buying cars, buying underwear, buying biscuits, the investments will obviously grow. But what would you do to increase investment? Use this opportunity to structurally bring in investors, right? This is where that ease of doing business, etc. comes. Now, I'm not talking about the ease of doing business index, which we are probably doing very well, but this is about real ease of doing business. Whole lot of complexities exist, and I don't think we need to talk about it at length here. But anybody who knows who's going to invest in any business in India knows that this is a massive, complicated place to do business. And worse, now you have a huge amount of political risk because policies can change midway during the game. You might have invested in $200 million in a railway plant and suddenly government might say, oh, we're going to convert everything to electric. Or you might have done e-commerce and suddenly you might change e-commerce rules. Or in the previous government, we had some guy talking about retrospective, implementing retrospective taxation. Yeah. So that kind of instability or uncertainty, unpredictability in terms of your regulatory environment is a deterrent to investment. So in fact, one of the easiest ways to signal to everybody is to say that, guys, we are not going to change rules during the game, right? If that kind of a signal of stability is sent, I think investors will come.
Stating that intent. So there's two kinds of things that you can look at here. One is the proximate causes, which is availability of credit. That's a massive problem. So this is a good time again to relook at some of the FDI rules, to get finances from outside, FII rules and so on. And again, clean up the mess in the banking system. This whole bank merger thing is a cop-out. I don't want to again get into that aspect. I think we've done a couple of episodes on NPA crisis and so on. But just cleaning up that banking system.
Does
and
it
there
make
are no
sense
solutions.
to halt the bank merger for a year or two?
No, I mean, they've done that, but that's really not going to solve any of the NPA crisis. In fact, you're creating this too big to fail kind of banks, right? So that has no real implications on the present level of NPAs or the lending ability of banks.
If you get the managements of the banks concentrating on where do they go, who gets what, and the internal reform of the banks at a time when the economy needs to be fixed.
Definitely, lending will come down a lot more because of these mergers.
Because the same guy who has now, or same guy or girl who's got to now do 10 different things and has to now prioritize what do you do about your IT, what do you do about your pension, what do you do about VRS, instead of fixing the economy outside.
Yeah. That is absolutely sure. In fact, if anything, the bank mergers now are a distraction.
Yeah.
That's there. But yeah, that's the NPA crisis. So how do you overall make credit available? So one part of it is the monetary policy side, right? Reduce rates and so on, which I think a lot of people are clamoring for.
This increasing liquidity in
the market. I'm still slightly wary
because
this is
still this fake macroeconomic
No,
stuff.
you don't want to get into RBI starting to print money or lowering rates too much, because the effects of it is going to come later on, okay? And it's going to come and bite them in the rear. So be careful of that. But overall, yes, increased liquidity in the market.
I somehow find all these macroeconomic solutions dubious.
Corporate bond market, for example, increased liquidity, part of the solution, corporate bond market.
But that's not a macro.
That's not a market, but that's exactly part of increasing liquidity. You want corporates to be able to borrow easily from institutional investors and even regular investors, right? If I want to buy or lend to Tata, the only way I can do it is through the equity market, which is extremely unstable. I would prefer bonds.
Okay.
So
now let's come to the third part, which is...
Wait, on investment itself, what are the big things? Are there any big projects or big, let's say, cities or something which can channelize this investment,
I would have put that under government. I was thinking of talking about it when we talk about what governments can do, right? Big infrastructure projects and so forth. Yeah, so let's talk about government then, right? So I think a lot of it, the investment cycle can be started typically in Keynesian methods by big infrastructure projects. This is the time to build new highways, this is the time to build new ports and airports and all of that, with government spending a lot of the money, which makes sense. I think capital equipment for the armed forces, for security forces, etc. Right? For example, when the United States started setting up the Homeland Defense, there's a huge surge in the industry for for police and for armed forces and all of that. You're talking about millions of people who need boots, right? Yeah. You need millions of people who need new uniforms. You need millions of people who need new places to stay, and they'll be moving from one place to the other, right? So you can do a lot of that through investing on the things that you already need. It's not wasteful government expenditure. This is essential government expenditure. You prioritize it and put it up front. Also building new cities and those various other ideas that we've been talking about. Yeah. But it comes at the fiscal deficit issue, right? How big a hole are you going to have, and how are you going to finance it?
Yeah. Well, no known answer for it, but some of the things that they've been doing anyway, their fiscal deficit has been 5% instead of 3% because of all this off-record borrowings and so on. I think it's far better for them to do it in a more more open channel.
Are you accusing the government of doing illegal things?
Yes, always. But anyway, do it in a more transparent manner, such that you can actually account for.
Government should do illegal things in a transparent manner. I mean, what are you saying?
Do the legal things in a transparent manner.
I see.
Okay, but these two things are opposing each other, right? One, we said that we have to reduce tax. Basically, revenue side will be impacted if GST is reduced, the personal income tax levels are reduced, etc. And on the other side, there is expenditure increase in terms of building new cities or any of these reforms. So
I knew Sri Kotasthane is going to talk about right? The fiscal hawk of the room is going to speak up. So why don't you answer your own question?
I don't have no answer.
I would say revenue expenditure. This is again the perfect time to reduce your revenue expenditure. Transfers, relook at some of the subsidies, programs, etc. that we're doing, which has again massive negative consequences for the Indian economy, right? Can you really be bold at this point of time and say we're going to reduce some of the revenue expenditure? I mean, I would always, this is again me coming from an economics viewpoint, but I think there is
always a space for tightening your belt. Any government at any time will be able to tighten its belt. 5-10% of its expenditure it should be able to contain. Because, it's not that, it's just that you have to prioritize, right? And the signal has to be sent to everybody that this is a belt tightening time. So you can't be expecting a whole lot of great things for yourself when the economy is not doing well, right? Yeah. But it's difficult to do, but I think it's possible to do, 5-10% of your expenditure. Any government department will be able to.
Yeah. The way I would think of it is stop some of the centrally sponsored schemes.
Absolutely,
there are way too many still being run, and it's easy to, you will achieve that 10% saving.
Yeah, and I think there's one more. I was just on the email with Dr. Govind Rao. In fact, I think one of the interesting things is you should use the opportunity for the states to make the states raise their own revenues. There are a lot of areas where the states have the power to tax people, but they don't for political reasons. But you can't have a free ride like that, right? You have a number of subjects where you can tax citizens, but you just choose not to. Yeah. So why should the union actually make up for that shortfall, right? So the centrally sponsored schemes probably is a good place to start cutting. To say that states, if this is important to you, do it on your own money.
Yeah, exactly. And constitutionally also it makes sense because they are in the domain.
You can't chant federalism for one thing and not federalism for the other.
And then make cities ultimately also raise revenue.
Yeah. But let them. In fact, I think it's good for democracy because once people feel that they're paying tax to a particular government, they'll hold that government a lot more accountable than right now, right?
So what are the other components?
The other component is exports.
That's a really tricky issue.
Increase exports, reduce imports, right?
Yeah. When we had, since we are on this topic, when we had this opportunity to actually get into a trade deal with the US, for example, and improve our trade relations with them, we again screwed up because we have some other misplaced priorities. For example, the price cap on stents or something on dairy products, all of these things are e-commerce rules. we've done this and we blew a really good chance of getting a long-term trade deal with the US?
So obviously that means that increasing our exports implies this is the time for us to fight for free trade.
Yes.
Right? There's no other way we can do this export game unless we can fight for free trade.
Yeah. Part of that fighting for free trade is again domestic reform. Remove price caps. Make agriculture, for example, a bit more this thing. Let agricultural exports as well.
And be open to some imports as well. Right?
Absolutely.
It will be required, and because import will feed into the products we make as well.
Yeah, and the other big opportunity really is because there is a US-China trade war. A lot of the big companies are trying to diversify out of China, out of East Asia. And the only economy that can provide a size which is alternative to China is us. I mean, like in IT, one of the reasons Bangalore is a hub is because you can come to Bangalore, set up a company and hire 5,000 people who are qualified to do a high-tech job, right? Similarly, India is the only place which can come to where you can hire 100,000 people to do, to work in your factory. Now, that opportunity again is a great external opportunity. It comes at a time when there is a need for us to fix our domestic economy. Yeah. It's the time to go and go after the big manufacturing thing. Go and court big manufacturing companies, make them come to India and sort out your domestic laws to make them operate.
Yeah, do land labor reforms. We've been saying this like parrots now. And then you need a little bit more at this point of time to attract them. So you might have to do SEZ, some kind of tax cuts or tax incentives at least.
In fact, I don't even think they need tax incentives. I think they don't need tax incentives.
You just need a stable environment to come manufacture and be assured that there will be property rights.
Yeah, and at such times, if you see people like what our friend Jagan Reddy did in Andhra Pradesh, you come out and say that all previous contracts for Amravati are finished, done, we are not going to do, right? If you show such a U-turn mentality, no foreign investor is going to come, right? So it's these kind of things that do a lot more damage in the sense that it's not specifically Jagan Reddy did not hurt the economy in any foreign investment in any tangible, direct way. But the fact that there are politicians who can do this and the political system accepts such kind of U-turns scares the hell out of foreign investors.
Is RCEP a part of this export?
RCEP is again all of the above. It is a part of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a lot of studies saying that, for example, when the TPP was being talked about and if India was going to be left out of it, there's estimates that we'd lose out about 50 billion a year. Dollars of trade this thing. So that's a big amount. Now RCP, if it's coming out as one of the alternatives to the original TPP, we should be part of it. We should be part of any such trade agreement if we can.
Unfortunately, the Indian political economy is loaded against the cause of free trade.
Yeah.
Your so-called center-right governments also don't like free trade. Your center-left governments hate free trade. Your right-wing economic institutions hate free trade.
Yeah.
Your left-wing economic institutions hate free trade. So the big businesses of India hate free trade. Right? Small and medium enterprises also at some level hate free trade. Although they are also beneficiaries of free trade. So basically you have an entire ecosystem which opposes the idea that you need to have trade. So, and yet you want to have high exports and low imports. How does it, it doesn't square, I think. But, one of the things is that people don't have a obligation to be logically consistent. So they can say that we want to have high exports at the same time have a stand against free trade.
Yeah, and I think the US-India trade thing shows that probably exports is still not being seen as an engine to increase this Y that we were talking about.
Yeah, and I think it's also because maybe sitting here in Bangalore, which is a global city where exports of services is a big deal, we think that the case for exports and free trade is...
it kind of makes itself.
It's self-evident. But in large parts of the country, exports are a very remote part of their lives, right? So they might not see it the same way.
But we've seen that continuously over the years. The Indian government has not really looked at exports as the engine of growth. We had at least some lip service in the last couple of years saying we want to increase India's share in world trade from whatever 1% to 4% and so on. That's probably the only time even we've heard where people are looking at trade as an important component of entire GDP. But nothing's been done about it as of yet.
So that's why when we circle back to the conversation, right? is that a lot of the bandwidth of this economic conversation is occupied by macroeconomists. We'll talk about twin balance sheets, interest rates, monetary policy, as if that's going to solve the entire problem, right? It is an economic crisis. It's not a financial market crisis, or it's not an RBI crisis. It affects the Indian economy, which includes consumers, investors, exporters, importers, and government. So if you look only at one little instrument called interest rate or transmission of credit or NPA and all these things, you're missing the plot. And this is what I find in the public discourse. Public discourse is all centered around what RBI should do and what finance ministry should do.
Yeah, right. So thank you both of you for joining, and we moved beyond the cyclical versus the structural debate and discussed a few solutions. So hope our listeners will like it. If you have any more suggestions, please do write into us. Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
How aware do you think you are of your laws and rights? Do you look up to laws when you are caught up in situations? Do you know what your rights are when you're stuck somewhere bad? Well, here's a show that can help you move an inch closer to being aware of what your rights are. Tune into Know Your Qanoon with me, Amber Rana. This is a podcast meant to answer all your law-related queries. Catch Know Your Qanoon every week on the IVM website or the app or anywhere you get your podcast from.
Do you wish you were smarter? Well, so do we. But the next best thing?
We could make you sound smarter.
And to help you with this endeavor, we are Simplified, a podcast that attempts to break down the complex world around you with a little knowledge, a lot of poor jokes, and a ton of random trivia.
Episodes out every Monday
On the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts.
See ya!